right, so I'm going to take the time to depart from the renovation. It's cold outside, can't paint, and talk about drum shells. Hype in the industry, in the drum manufacturing industry, about drum shells. I'm very passionate about this subject. I'll tell you why in a second. I've been making my own drums for over 25 years, from component parts like Keller shells, or making my own stave snare drums, or metal drums from sheet metal, other stuff like that. Experimental drums that I've been working on the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years now. So I've gained a certain amount of experience and a lot of observation about things as far as what a drum is and what a drum does. Over the years, this subject, I get myself in a lot of trouble. I got to the point where I just saw so much developing that on discussion forums, drummer forums, I began to speak my piece on it, and oh my, guys, they can get really upset on this subject. I'm just trying to present some information that I believe would be a benefit for the drumming community. I do not speak against any manufacturer's products. Everybody makes great drums. And that's, to me, that's at all levels too. Beginner, intermediate, high-end, high-level products. Everybody makes great drums. What's this gig about drum shells? What is the deal with that? And why do manufacturers say so much about their drum shells? My experience has shown me, let me tell you why I'm passionate about this, okay? It's the kids, the young people, anybody really, that looks at the ads in the magazines or watches the videos online and think that because a plywood shell, and I'll be honest, for any shell for that matter, all things being equal, the way a shell is constructed, the woods that are used, the way the plies are glued, the way the plies are run, the way the plies are cut, all this stuff goes into this superior drum sound, and young people, a lot of people are influenced by this, but the young people go to their parents, and the parents are shelling out a boatload of money for drums that the kids are convinced are the end of the world, and they're not going to sound any better or any different than anybody else's drums, almost any line, and I'm going to prove that. I'm going to do this part 1 and part 2. Right now, part 1, shells, okay? But I am passionate about this subject because this hype, this ultra hype, has just gone too far. It's gotten ridiculous. I understand capitalism. I understand you're going to business to make money. I understand you have a product that you make, you want to sell it, you advertise. And you make your product in your advertising seem the best that it can be. But there comes a point where I say this at the beginning, and if I remember, I'll say it at the end. This whole idea of shell construction, and bearing edges too, for that matter, I'll get into that as well. Maybe I'll do a part 3. Matter of fact, that was my idea, but I'm going to get ahead of myself. I got a million things going through my mind on this, but let me stick to what I'm doing here. When it gets to the point where you get information going out that is just not true, and I'm going to prove it to you. It's just not true. Then I think, wow, man, this is not right. If a manufacturer wants to tout their products and make cool ads and stuff and have, snappy websites and all this stuff, that's fine. But when you start putting out information that is not just a shame, it's a sham, then I began to feel the need to just say stuff and ask questions. Even asking questions on some drum forums will get you into a lot of trouble, let alone just stating what you believe is the truth in the case of the matter. So anyway, that's why I'm passionate about this. It's just gone so far, and the kids get influenced. It's not good. It's not good. It's not right. All right, now let's dispel another thing here, okay? Right off the bat. All right? When I do this and the next video as well, please don't get into this stuff in the comment. And I'll leave the comments open, and I'll be honest. I will state what I believe is an honest observation in my experience here. Give honest comments, that's fine. But don't get into the whole microphone thing, okay? And don't get into the whole YouTube compression thing. I'll tell you why it doesn't matter. Number one, and this is just common sense. This is logic and common sense, right? If there were 5 people in this room discussing this subject of drum shells, I'm using a Zoom Q8, but I don't care if it's a cell phone microphone, I don't care if it's a recording microphone, any kind of a room mic. It doesn't. Would you be able to tell the difference between my voice and 5 other people sitting in this room discussing this subject? Yes, you would. Well, I can tell you that the human voice is a whole lot more complex than a drum shell and a finished drum. So if you can tell the difference between people talking, there are all kinds of discussions that you can see on YouTube. Can you tell the difference just listening to their voices? Yes. If you could not tell the difference, if differences in the way drums sound or are perceived to sound was not possible because of YouTube compression or because just some microphones are not thought to be as good as others, I admit a cell phone mic, and maybe even this mic, when I get into the second video and start striking drums, you know what it's like, okay? Unless I'm wearing a lapel mic, I've got stereo mics on top of that camera. Good mics, all right? They're going to pick up my voice. But once I strike a drum, now this doesn't necessarily have audio, automatic level control. When that happens, you're talking and everything is fine, then you do something that's louder than your voice, and the camera immediately shuts down to take in the sound, the extra volume, and now you can't hear the voice anymore. I've had that problem with doing videos. With this one, there's no automatic level control. So that means I may strike a drum or do something louder than my voice, and the microphone, maybe it'll just max out, right? It doesn't have what it needs to take in that extra volume. And so I've seen videos where people use cell phone cameras and it's just too much volume and you get a lot of distortion and whatnot. Okay, I understand that, but nothing's going to distort on these mics, not at the level I have it. They shouldn't anyway. All right, but if it was the case that microphones could not pick up the differences in drums, supposed dramatic differences because of drum shells, well then why would all the drum shops that are putting audition videos of drum sets on YouTube and other places, their own websites, why would they do it if you couldn't tell the difference? Now I have watched literally hours and hours and hours of audition videos from Memphis Drum Shop and all the different drum shops that put their drum. I listen and I think, okay, can somebody? I'm wearing headphones, good ear monitors, whatever. I don't hear anything shockingly different about anything that somebody would tell me. And I'm talking about different materials as well. I don't hear anything amazingly different as I'm listening to these things. Maybe in bass drums, maybe in toms. This is all different materials too. Snare drums is another subject because the heads are tensioned differently, and that's a whole gig about snare drums. The wires and stuff. The dynamics of sound compression and sound waves in a snare drum, that's why snare drums can sound different. But the fact is, if you use heads on a metal drum that quote-unquote warm the sound, you can get a steel snare drum to sound very close to a wood snare drum. Anybody can do that. There's no magic to it. So all this gig about drum shells. Oh yeah. Well, that'll be the next video. These aren't tuned. Some people say, well, I think the sound of the drums stinks, man. You didn't tune the drums right. This is not about sound. This is not about the overall sound. When I get to it, I'll explain more about that. But that's really not an issue either, because all things considered, if everything is tuned to the same relative pitch, you might not like that tone. You might not like that pitch. Maybe that's not the pitch that you would play with. Maybe those aren't the heads that you would use. That's got nothing to do with it. I'm talking about drum shells and how they supposedly affect the sound of a drum. That's what I'm going to address here. So we're talking about the drum shells, not the pitch of the final constructed drum. Recently I was on a drum forum that I go to, and somebody posted a video about this subject. And I thought, okay, I'm going to basically stay out of this one. But what they did was they posted a video from NAMM by the Ford Drum Company. I've known about them for 10, 15 years. I like these guys. You know, they're honest. They make a fine instrument. No question about it. But anyway, Jimmy Ford is standing there at NAMM. Somebody's got I don't know, it's probably just their cell phone. Could be a camera, I don't know. And he's got a stick, and he's got a bunch of manufactured drums in a circle there. You can see plexiglass and, you know, whatever different materials there are. Jimmy Ford goes with a stick and he hits each drum once. They all sound the same. Now look, if a microphone can pick up a deeper voice, or if a microphone can pick up my voice, or if a microphone can pick up a higher voice, wouldn't it pick up? If all these drums are all tuned the same and the shells affected the sound that much so you get a supposed low-end presence, or you get high-end articulation, wouldn't that be picked up? Well, you say it can't be picked up on a cell phone. I'll tell you why it could, but I'll address that in the next video. For the sake of the shells, though, all right, when you look at that Ford video from NAMM, there's another one out there. There's more and more going out there because people are waking up to this subject. I'm going to put my 2 cents into it. There's another guy named Kevin Fortunato. Kevin Fortunato has 4 toms from different companies. He sets them up, hits each one. I don't hear any major differences. If there are any differences at all and there are nuances, when you play a full set of drums, they're gone. When you play a full set of drums and cymbals, let alone in a band, let alone if the drums are mic'd and all this is dealing with a PA and boards and stuff, whatever nuances a drum shell may create are lost in full set play. If you want to play whose ever drums because of whatever reasons, that's your business. I'm just going to address this idea of shells, okay? Whether it's plywood, these shells that I have here, maple, birch, poplar. These shells are a 1/4 inch thick. So all things being equal, they're 1/4 inch thick shells. If you go down to 7.5 mil, you go down 3/16, and there's almost no difference when you do the old thumb test, as you'll see. But I'm just dealing with that. But it doesn't matter if it's solid, whether it's steam bent, whether it's blocks, staves, Kevlar, fiberglass, plexiglass, acrylic, whatever. It doesn't matter because the sound of a drum is the heads. Change the heads, change the personality and character of the drum. The sound of a drum is the heads, all right? I'll deal with bearing edges, I think, when I get to another video to deal with it. I'll talk a little about depth as well. Let's do this first, okay? Mallet. Now, you know what the thump test is, right? Just you balance the shell and you thump it. Dun, dun, dun. Maple shell, right? These are 9x10 shells. Birch shell, right? Balance it on the finger. Dun, 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 dun. Poplar shell. Now I got these are Keller shells. I guess Anderson International is where I get shells, and they sell Keller shells. They call this a mahogany shell. It's got an inner and an outer, maybe 1/60th of an inch layer of mahogany veneer. It'll look nice when it's finished it up, but I wouldn't call this a mahogany drum. The basic shell of the drum is poplar. Okay, dun dun. 3 different shells, same thickness. I could hit this shell, dun dun. Slight. No, that's pretty. A little higher there. You can go around and you can hit these shells in different spots, and you might get a slightly different pitch. Why is that? As a matter of fact, I noticed on this one, dun dun, it's dead. Why is it dead? Because plywood shells are made with glue. And glue is glue. Glue is not a musical instrument. Glue is glue. I don't care how thick a blob of glue that you pour out and let it dry, it's a blob of glue. Hard glue. Doesn't have any tone, doesn't make any musical sound. When you have to glue these layers together, right? When you glue these layers together, you can easily create dead spots because wood is an organic material. And you glue it in, and the companies will say, well, we use different types of pressures and different processes so that you can get bum bum. You can get this tone from your drums. Why do we have a dead spot here? Dun dun. Why is that? Because of glue. but there's more than that. So here's maple shell. Done, done. Thumb, forefinger. I hold the shell. I just killed the shell. I killed it with a thumb and a forefinger. What do you think happens? This is a 10-inch drum. What do you think happens when you are going to affix 12 pieces of metal onto this shell? And then you're going to take a couple of membranes and a couple of metal or wood hoops, and you're going to compress those membranes onto this plywood shell. What do you think that's going to do to this? You're not going to have any tone. You know what's really funny about this? Some companies that say they pitch match their shells, and this creates the best sounding drum set that you can have when your shells are pitch matched. But then they talk about a wide tuning range. What? Wait a minute. Seriously? Do let us have common sense. Drums will sound best because a shell has a pitch, which is totally obliterated once you hook lugs up to this thing and compress it with the membranes, the heads. But then, how can you have a wide tuning range? You've either got dun. You either got that or you got nothing. Why? How can you get a wide tuning range? Because the sound of the drum is the drum head, not the shell. The drum shell, regardless of how many plies, and I don't care if it's a 1/4 inch solid shell, I don't care if it's 1/4 inch, whatever it is. What you're doing is you're creating the cylinder, and here's how. You know how the sound of a drum is heads? Glad I thought about this. The sound of the drum is the heads because of Arbeiter flats, Remo rototoms, other companies that have come and maybe gone, who make basically a frame for a head to sit on, and you listen to the sound of the drums and they talk about the pure tone of these drums. What is the pure tone? It's the heads. Heads, when you tighten them up, when you tension them, boom, you get some heads you can buy. This is, I don't know if, there's even this is a looser. You can take some heads out of the box and they're tight enough already to start out with that they already have a pitch to them. All right, so the sound of a drum, I believe, is the heads. And whatever you do to the shell, whatever the shell is, contributes nuances that are lost in full set play. When you want to start advertising that your shells make this superior drum sound, I'm sorry, I don't believe it. It's a sham. So here you have a sound chamber, right? That's what you've done. You've got your heads, and you know that when they're tensioned, even if they have no shell at all, they still sound like a drum. Terry Bozzio, Bill Bruford used to play Remo rototom sets. I have a Remo rototom set around here somewhere, just the toms. And other drummers have used rototoms. They still use rototoms. I've recorded with rototoms in the last few years. And they sound great. All right, so you know that the sound of a drum, if you don't see a shell and it still sounds like a drum, how is that? Because you have a head that's somehow been tensioned to a frame that allows you to tighten it up. All right? So you take those two membranes, top and bottom head. They call it a batter head, the resonant head. They can be different thicknesses, same thickness, whatever. You take a cylinder, now you've created a sound chamber. You strike the batter head. Immediately sound waves begin moving. They strike the bottom head. And now those sound waves and that sound pressure is trapped inside the cylinder, inside the sound chamber. And depending on the density of the sound chamber, of the cylinder, the density of the wood or the density of the material will determine how long those sound waves can splash around in there before they dissipate. So if you have a very, that's why people talk about a metal drum. And I've seen, and that's interesting too, because I've seen videos of titanium, full set of titanium drums, steel drums. They all, copper drums. Well, they still all sound like drums. I don't hear anything tremendously different about it when I hear a guy play a full set of metal drums. But if metal drums might sound brighter, sustain a little longer, have a more of a resonance to them, it's because it's a dense material. It's hard, it's metal, it's dense material, and the sound waves, they can't penetrate, they can't get lost. Once the sound waves are inside the drum, what are they going to do? They're going to dissipate as they begin to move through the material. Now you just heard, whether it's oak or birch or poplar, the shells sound the same. If you have a wood that's really soft, those sound waves will absorb into the shell and they'll dissipate more quickly. The harder the material, I've got a snare drum over here, a shell made by Addiction Drums. It's a eBay, ironwood. Hard stuff on the Janka scale. Hard stuff. And I wanted to get the hardest wood I could get and see what it's like. And you might think you're listening to a metal snare drum when you hear this thing. First time somebody came over when I had the drum set up, it was another place, and he did not know that I changed the snare drum. And he sat behind the drums and he hit the snare drum. I could feel it in my gut out in front of the drums, and he immediately looked down. He didn't know he was playing another snare drum than the last one I had. I said, it's different, isn't it? It's eBay. It's hard wood. And so you've created a very hard, dense sound chamber. That can change, but when you're dealing with plywood, come on, folks. Especially when somebody says, yeah, our drum's, relative pitch, but it has a wide tuning range. Wait a minute. You can't have both. The fact is, all drums can have a wide tuning range if you have decent heads on them and they're mounted correctly. You don't want to constrict the shell. I'm not speaking against the idea of a drum shell, a finished drum, mounted and vibrating as a unit. I'm not speaking against that. But the ultra hype of shells made with this wood on the outside, that wood on the inside, these woods in the core with grains running this way and that contributes to this sound. Oh, please, it's BS. I'm sorry to be that blunt. It's BS. And here's how I know that what I'm saying is true, because anybody, as a matter of fact, you know what the Ford guys mentioned on a video of theirs? They were at NAMM and they went to the sonar booth, walking around, go to the sonar booth, and the sonar booth has a bunch of toms from all their different lines all lined up. And so they went around and tapped each one and looked at each other and said, well, they sound the same to me. And then they brought other people over and they had their backs turned and they said, okay, we're going to hit the drums. Can you tell the difference in the sound of these drums? Nobody could tell the sound of the difference in the sounds. Now, I don't know if sonar meant that. I don't know if that was their purpose. I doubt it. But the fact is that Ford went and got a whole bunch of drums from different companies and lined them all up and hit them all at that NAMM. It's 48 seconds of just in-your-face proof. And somebody says, well, it's the microphone. No, it's not. It's not the microphone. The microphone is not practicing selective hearing. It just hears what it hears. And if any shell was made so dramatically different that it so dramatically changed the sound of the drum, then the microphone would pick up some kind of change in sound. Somebody said, well, there could be a low-end presence that a cell microphone is not going to pick up. Well, wait a minute. If the cell microphone doesn't have the transient response or the frequency response to pick up really low end, and you have a drum that has real low end more so than other drums, you know why you'll still hear it? Because it won't pick up any low end from all the other drums, but it'll pick up something different about the one that has the superior definite low end. It'll just, somewhere in the range of the frequency response of that microphone, it's going to pick up a difference in that drum. All two the same, there should be a difference if the shell makes that much difference. It doesn't. Bearing edges. I'll deal more with this later. As a matter of fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take these three shells and I'm going to turn them into toms and I'm going to do a bit different bearing edge. So what do we got? We got 3 drums, 6 different bearing edges I'll do. And you're going to hear, for the most part, it will not change the sound of these drums at all. I'll prove that when it comes, though. I mean, you don't have to believe me just because I say it. But what are we talking about? Again, please, do let us have common sense. What are we talking about? Here's what we're talking about. You put a bearing edge on a drum. Now, all the companies, I use attack heads. I've been using them for years. I think they're a little brighter sounding, and they last just as long as anything else. And so I like them. And they don't cost as much either. So that's good, too. All companies, when they make their head, they put a collar on it, all right? And all companies don't necessarily have the same shape to that collar. But when you make a bearing edge, these don't have any bearing edges. I drop it down. You want the apex of your bearing edge, all right? You want it to hit the right spot of the apex of that collar, where the flat surface of the head is, and then the collar. And if you don't, then the drum will not, the head will not seat correctly on the shell. Okay, that can affect the tuning. That affects the sound for sure. You want your drum head to sit, and I'm going to dispel some rumors about this too when I get to the next video. But anyway, you want your head to seat correctly on the shell, so that the head has maximum tone in its vibration, right? Maximum sound waves shooting out, bouncing back and forth between the heads. So you make, and now you try to make, and whether or not, if you just make an inside 45 and you just let the outside of the shell come up, and that's where your point is, well, you're going to hit the collar back here somewhere, and it's not going to sit right, and your drum is not going to sound as full as it might sound if you give the head a chance to vibrate the most, right? So that's why a lot of companies make like a double 45, because even if the collars are different from all the manufacturers of the heads will basically sit decently on a double 45. It comes in enough on the shell. Now that depends on the thickness of the shell. Premier used to make drums that were like 1/8 of an inch smaller, just so no matter what head you put on them, the heads would seat correctly. I don't know if they still do that, but years ago they used to advertise that. We make our shells just a little bit smaller so that the heads sit, no matter which head you choose to use, it's going to sit correctly on the drum. The sound of the drum is the heads. The bearing edge may affect the sound in nuances, in little ways, to help the head to sustain a little bit more. But the more wood that contacts the head, the less the head vibrates. That's common sense, right? So if you have a bearing edge, some companies will make, they'll take like a round over, not a baseball bat, which if you put a baseball bat on here, it's not going to be much different than the flat, and you drop the head on, what are you going to do? You're going to mute the head. More wood's going to contact the plastic, the mylar. All right, so you can either go for full vibration, which gives you a slightly brighter sound, by just having a real sharp, I've made bearing edges sharp enough to cut my finger, running my finger around the bearing edge. I mean, you can make some seriously sharp bearing edges. But most times they flatten just a little bit, you know, all these little things that they do to create nuances, I believe are lost. You might get a drum that has the most sustain, but the reason it has the most sustain is because the heads are allowed to go as long as they can, and because the shell is mounted correctly. Isolation mount. It's not constricted by a bracket on the shell. So the entire drum is allowed to freely vibrate. But as far as dramatic differences, as far as the shell goes, no, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I haven't seen it. Why do manufacturers tout so much about their shells? Because they want to sell drums, not someone else's heads. I mean, that's the gig, right? How did this hype begin? Well, the fact of it is, I know how the hype began. I've been looking at this for 45 years. I'm 63 now. I've been watching things for a long time. I know how this hype began. I'm not going to get into that. But it really is, you need to be aware. If you're looking to buy drums, and I just today, somebody else on a discussion forum and said, what's the best drum that I can buy for, you know, our music is very loud and it's very heavy. What's the best drums that I can buy? It doesn't matter. If you're going to be touring, you're going to be using microphones anyway. So if you want louder drums, the thickness of a shell, the density of the shell will help to make a drum a little louder. But if you're using a PA system and mics, that doesn't mean anything. There are certain things, you know, I happen to like thicker shells because I get more volume and I also get more sustain. Why? Because they're thicker shells and the sound waves they can bounce around a little bit longer. So you get a slightly livelier sound. But it's not a tremendous difference. I've used 5-ply shells too. 6-ply shells, 7.5 millimeter, 10. And you know, the differences, the nuances that are there, I just listen to the videos that are out there. Listen to all the videos that are out there. And the differences are not so dramatic or unique that it makes any difference in full set play. So what makes a difference when you go to buy a drum then? Is it the shell? No. The sound of a drum is the heads. Change the heads definitely change the character and personality and sound of your drums. But as far as the shells, no, I told that kid, guy, I don't know how old he is, put the original poster, I said, look, whatever you want to do, buy whatever you want. Buy whatever you want. A slightly louder drum, buy something with thicker shells. But it doesn't matter what you buy. Here's what you're going to concern yourself with if you're touring: hardware. All right? And concern yourself with the cosmetic looks of it under the lights or whatever. Whatever you like to look at. That's funny too. You know, you buy a drum set, and for the most part, all you see is the bass drum. All you see is the heads looking at it, but you can see the bass drum. So we get these drums. We love the finish. The only time you see the finish is when you walk by the set in front of it. Otherwise, you're sitting behind the drums and you see the bass drum, but you can't see the toms. You know, I think it's kind of funny, really. But whatever finish you like, and that's the one thing that will create the difference in drums. All right, the finishes are better on high-end drums. The chrome plating might be better. The hardware that comes with a high-end drum set is generally better, more rugged, more roadworthy, more options and features and tilting angles and all kinds of stuff like that. Those are the things that might make a difference. Shell design in a high-end drum compared to an intermediate drum, even compared to an entry-level drum, and you say, oh, you're out of your mind. You think so? Part 2 comes next, and I'll prove it to you. All right, so drum shells. As a matter of fact, even if a shell's not completely round, it's not going to change. I've made drums. I've used shells from Keller that have been out of round. And my drums don't sound any different round or a little bit out of round. No big deal. The sound of the drum is the heads. And if you can get it to seat on a bearing edge correctly, that's where you're going to get your sound from. It's the heads. It's not the shell. Now, if you want to say, you are out of your mind, dude, you do not know what you're talking about, okay? Part 2 next, and I'm going to prove it. Thanks for watching.